Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to do a shootout video discussing Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here from 1975. I am going to go over the best sounding versions of this record you can own on vinyl. Now, I actually filmed and posted this video about a month or two ago to my members only section on YouTube. I got some feedback from some of the members that they wanted to see a couple of other pressings included in this video. So I decided to seek out, purchase those pressings, listen to them, and then reshoot this video, and here we go. I'm going to start out with the 2011 pressing. This came out mastered by Doug Sachs of the Mastering Lab and James Guthrie. This is probably one of my least favorite versions of this record. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but it is pretty anemic and doesn't have any sense of drama whatsoever. It's a very anemic, plain, and bland sounding record. Pretty much everything you can buy of this record, I think, is better than this. This is pretty terrible. So avoid this, and if you have it, get rid of it. You can get something significantly better for less money. You'll hear options later in the video. If you're seeking out this record for the first time, don't seek this one out. Let's go to something better. Now, this next record is something that I kind of recommended to people for a long time. It was kind of in the back of my mind, without doing a detailed shootout of this record, this was kind of my go-to. This was something I recommended and I kind of was a fan of. But after doing an exhaustive listen to this record, who knows, maybe, hundreds of times, I kind of came to the conclusion that I wasn't really a fan of this record. But one of the things it has going for it is it's abnormally quiet vinyl, and that's a little bit misleading with this particular record. This is the Japanese Master Sound. The Master Sound is an audiophile record series out of Japan, and this benefits from what pretty much all Japanese records benefit from: extremely clean and quiet vinyl. But the problem with it is it doesn't have kind of the sizzle on the more dramatic songs. This record, you really want to not necessarily listen to Shine On Crazy Diamond, which is low-key and mellow, but you want to focus more on Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, Wish You Were Here. There is kind of a synth and bass presence, for instance, on Welcome to the Machine that's just missing on this. That synth that just moves the air around you with that thunderous bass, and it has a fantastic dynamic range. And also, it's a dynamic range that progressively just builds. Like on Welcome to the Machine, it progressively builds and builds and builds, and it has a dynamic range, and it just surrounds you, and that's all missing on this record. Although, it has something that cannot be ignored on this record, and that is extremely quiet vinyl. Very important with this record because there are a lot of soft, quiet passages. For instance, on Shine On, You Crazy Diamond. Yeah, Shine On Crazy Diamond, quiet passages, beneficial. Other tracks on this, not so much. But because of the cost, this isn't a record. If you have it, that's one thing, but it's not a record I would seek out. But to be honest, even if I had this record, I would want to still seek out some of these later pressings I talk about because they're dynamically much better and kind of offer a different experience on this record. So, yeah. Now, after that, let's talk about the U.S. Master Sound. There was a US Master Sound pressing, and there was actually two of them. Big difference between the two of these. One of them is defective. So the original pressing of this, you can tell by the product code on the side spine, this is HC33453, suffered from an RIAA equalization issue and was quickly replaced with this copy, which looks exactly the same. It's just got a different product category code, and that is HC4. So it just starts with a 4. This has the correct RIA equalization, but a very expensive record and not worth the cost. Primitive audiophile records tended to have, and this isn't just the Master Sound series, but a lot of early Mo-Fi's, Sweet Thunder, a lot of the early audiophile records suffered from almost a wonky EQing that was almost meant for record players of the day. They were kind of records that were meant to compensate for the shortcomings of record players 40 years ago. Not necessarily that this one screams that like some earlier MoFi pressings, but it's just lumped in a category of not really worth the money. It's very expensive, it's very collectible, and again, you've got nice, clean, quiet vinyl, so that kind of helps the record, and it kind of gives that optical, that sensory illusion, that what would you call it? That audible illusion that it's better, but it's really not. When you get into the meat of it, when you start getting in again to those tracks that are very dynamic and have a lot of synth to them, it just loses, it doesn't have the sense of drama that you'll find on my top, for instance, 3 pressings of this record. And it's just not worth the money. It's kind of a forgettable pressing. I have it on my shelf. I used it in this shootout. Would I ever put this on, even as my first, second, third, fourth choice? No, I wouldn't. There's just no reason, to be honest, other than having the shootout video of even owning this record. But I have it. I'm a Pink Floyd fan. I feel like I have to have it. But it's not my go-to, even a little bit. A couple of quad copies. I'm not going to actually compare these to any of these other records because it is a different mix. But the quad mixes in general are very good. And I think they're worth owning. If you want to, maybe you seek out the best sounding number 1, number 2, and then get a quad mix, I think they're worth owning. There's a lot more separation in those. The 3D effects, the panning is much more prevalent on the quad mix than it is on the US mix, but it has kind of a weird anomalous thing going on. There's almost an isolation to the instruments. Kind of a picture the other pressings, the non-quad pressings of this record, as a band in a room playing you a concert. Think of the quad mix as a band in multiple rooms, isolated, being presented to you on record as a band. It kind of has a disconjointed feel. But it's very well worth the listen to. It's a very fun record because you're hearing things and nuances that you don't hear in the normal mix. Now, for you that don't know what quadraphonic is, it's a primitive surround sound stereo. It was a 4-speaker surround sound. So you had your standard left and right stereo, but you had a rear left and right. Quadraphonic records can be played on modern turntables. No problem. Essentially what you're hearing as the end user is just an alternate mix, because quad mixes were an alternate mix. But when they get summed down, played on a modern record player to a 2-channel modern system, it just comes out as an alternate mix. But fun. I've got 2 different versions here. I think either one of these is fine. Quad records were made to a very, very high standard as far as the vinyl production goes, so they tended to be much higher quality because of the nature of making a quadraphonic record. But here I've got a UK quadraphonic and a, what is this? This is a US quadraphonic. Both, I wouldn't pick up whichever is more convenient and clean. Quadraphonic records you want to find extremely clean. The groove spacing, I think, is a little bit narrower on a quad record. And because of that, they're more susceptible to damage. So make sure you find a very clean quad record, whether it's the UK or the US. Either one is fine. Get the cleaner one. It's a fun listen to. I recommend it. Okay, let's get into the later US pressings. The later US pressings, and this is going to be kind of a preview of the first US pressing, because in order to talk about the later US pressing, I have to talk about what they lack over the better US first pressings. And that is, these kind of have now the equalization, kind of the sense of drama to them that the earlier US pressings have that you want in this record. But what they lack is the top end, kind of the dynamic range and the clarity. Almost as if these at this point were starting to be cut from multi-generations down. Maybe not the master tape, maybe not the safety, but who knows, maybe a 3rd or 4th generation, or maybe a worn out tape that had been used previously. But they're missing a lot. And the thing is, with this particular record, is there's no reason to really seek this out. Now, if you have it, I would still say at this point, I would still seek out a better copy. But if you have one of these later pressings, and you can kind of tell here, because if you look at a US first pressing, it came in that blue shrink. This is in a clear shrink with the hype sticker on the clear shrink, and also a lot of these have barcodes. If you have these, I would kind of seek out something better. Now, if you're listening to this in a bubble, any of these records, you're going to think to yourself, what the hell is Mike talking about? These records all sound fantastic. These are great sounding records. That's because this record was recorded extremely well. And isolated in a bubble, you would be, you know, not crazy for thinking I was crazy by commenting on the fact that you might need another version if this is what you have. But when you start listening to these one after another, and you have a better broad spectrum of pressings to choose from, you start noticing that a good record can get even better, can be getting much better. And that's kind of, you know, keep that in mind with this. This is a record that's just missing a little bit. It's the best way to describe it again is it's mastered from kind of a worn out, dull tape. Not really the way to go, especially because better copies are available in abundance, much easier to get. Now, there is a benefit to that later pressing. It's much easier to find a clean copy because at that point when that came out, the record was much older. So maybe somebody bought that just casually strolling into a record store as a filler. He was missing Wish You Were Here, or his previous copy got worn out and he bought another copy. But by that point in time, he didn't listen to it another 1,000 times. So I find them easier to find clean, quiet copies of. And also the vinyl is a much higher quality on those 80s reissues, US reissues. But it's not something starting from scratch you would seek out. And again, if you have it, replace it. Now here's kind of a little anomaly in the US later reissues. This is a 1980s pressing. This was done by a mastering engineer by the name of Barry Griffin. But the only thing that's unique about this is he only mastered one side. The B-side is more of that same 80s mediocreness, but the Barry side is actually quite exceptional. The problem I have with this record, and a lot of people tell me this is their go-to record. Now, one of the ways you can tell if you have a Barry record is it kind of has almost a seafoam green color on the label. But the best way to tell is if you look at the dead wax on side one, you're gonna see Barry in big letters in script. The problem I have with this record is nobody is really buying a record to listen to one side. And if you listen to what's going on the Barry cut side one versus the rando cut, whoever did it, side two, one is better than the other. And it's not so much better than the other that it's worth keeping this around. I think this is substantially better because of that side one than a lot of what I've shown you guys so far, but not so much better that I would say, hey, this is the only copy you need. It's a good cut. The Barry cut is really good, but do you want a really good side one and then you're gonna go grab another record and you're gonna get a side two? Because to be honest, to get a good side two, I think you're gonna get a record, one of my later choices, that's better than even the Barry cut. Now this is the 2016 Bernie Grundman cut. Bernie Grundman in 2016 pretty much did a whole recut of the entire Pink Floyd catalog. This is drastically better than the 2011 Doug Sax cut. This has a lot of the sound that you're looking for in this record. So it's got a sense of authority with the synths, the bass is there, it's prominent. It's weird though because it lacks like a tightness and a cleanness. For instance, on the bass and on the drums, it has more of a, it just doesn't have a drier sound that I feel the better copies have, which is a weird thing to say. Most people would think, dry, you don't want that. But on this particular record, the better sounding copies have a tightness, a very taut bass, a very taut low end. The drums are crisper and cleaner. You know, the thwack of a tom is just more immediate. It has a better decay to it, and that's missing on this copy. Now, if you're just a mediocre fan of this record, you kind of just want to have it in the collection, you've got this 2016 cut, this might be a point in time where this might do you. You know what I mean? This is enough. You're not an audiophile, you just want something that's good, you don't want to lose, you don't want to be missing anything. I would say maybe here this 2016, you can give it quits. But my assumption is if you're watching this video, you maybe don't want necessarily just a passable copy, which this clearly is. It's not bad, it's good, and I would take this over, as a whole, over everything really I've showed you. Although I'm really confused on the Barry cut because it's really good and then not so good side too. But the 2016 Bernie Grundman cut is a pretty solid choice. It really truly is. Okay, so up next, I've got a German first pressing, an A1, an A2, and an A3. These are actually, they're in backwards. The German first pressing has that star on the back. But I've got, as you see here, an A1 cut, an A2 cut, and an A3 cut. People rave about these German pressings. I find the A1 is pretty horrid. It's weak, it's anemic. This goes for the most money. This cut is pretty terrible. So just, that's no good. You don't want that. The 3 is not wonderful either, although quite a bit better than the A1 and can be had for much less money. The standout in the German cuts is the A2. For whatever reason, I think the A1 was probably so terrible. Somebody listened to it and said, oh my God, we got to make that better. They made it significantly better here. And then for whatever reason, when it came out to the third cut, we got more of what was on number 1, but a kind of a blend between 1 and 2, which kind of, you know, equaled the 3. A little bit of 2 and a little bit of 1 made sense to be a little bit of 3. But yeah, the German B2, A2, B2, that second cut, fairly expensive, pretty desirable, and I don't really think worth the squeeze. So they have the sense of drama. One of the things they've got going for them is they've got a much quieter, cleaner vinyl. But I think one of the things that the 2 suffers from is I think it's missing a little bit of the definition and a little bit of the clarity. My guess is it was probably made from not necessarily even a safety tape, but who knows? Maybe something even, it sounds to me like it's made from either maybe a 3rd generation tape. It's just missing a little the detail and a little definition. And I think it's more of a neutral. So it has a lot of the vibe of the better sounding cuts when it comes to the synth, the bass, but it's kind of a little bit more neutral. It's not overdone per se. And I think the best sounding copies kind of have some things on the record overdone. The synth, the bass. Again, focus on Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, Wish You Were Here. There's a sense on the best copies of drama on Welcome to the Machine when it starts getting into that synth and that choppy synth that just gets progressively louder and louder and louder and starts moving more and more air in your room. It's kind of dialed back a little bit on that 2 cut, but the best of the bunch. Not something in the States I would ever seek out. If you're living in Germany and you got easy access to a German A2 cut, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And how much do you want to go really much farther to try to seek something out? Say, for instance, if you're a German, because all these other copies I'm about to show you are pretty difficult to get and more pricey. And when I say difficult to get, not necessarily difficult to get, but difficult to get clean and listenable. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. Okay, so the US first pressing. Now this is a promo copy here. And I've got another promo copy. This is a unique promo copy because this particular promo copy is a stickered promo copy on the shrink, which is not very common. Normally you would have got this kind of more in this configuration without the shrink and the timing strip on this. This particular record is very similar to The Wall in the sense that when you get the promo copies or you get closer to the original first pressing, I think it's sonically better. And I think it starts to get progressively worse as you listen to copies that are manufactured later on. Now, one of the ways you can tell with Columbia is the first pressings are essentially 1A, 1B, or 1C copies. Those A, B, and C letters are designations for the plant codes. But they would have typically been made all at the same time, you know, one after another, using the same mastering notes, essentially just lacquer 1 was cut, lacquer 2 was cut, lacquer 3 was cut. They were designated A, B, and C, and they were sent to different pressing plants. But as you started getting later on, and you start getting later cuts, you started to add letters, you started to go farther down the alphabet. But although A1A, you know, the A was cut before the B, they're pretty much all done at the same time, and they're all pretty much universally considered first pressings, although the A would be the first of the first pressing. But I feel like The Wall that the earliest pressings of this record are better. The problem with this record is it came out in 1975 at a time where vinyl was pretty crummy sounding in the US. Now, I've had copies of this, and one of my copies, that one actually back there, was opened from new. and it was noisy out of the packaging. That is a 1A true first pressing. I got a guy that traded me in 2. I sold one, or no, I kept one sealed. I opened one, still have them both. That one was a 1A, and it's noisy out of the packaging because the vinyl, and that's just, it's kind of somewhat unavoidable. Now, there's a problem with that in the sense that there are very quiet parts of this record that kind of, I'm pretty good at tuning out surface noise. I've been doing it, listening to records a long time, and surface noise it's like white noise to me. I tune it out. But there's sometimes, and on some records, that it's harder to tune out. And this is kind of one of those. And I find it very difficult to get really clean and quiet first pressings. Now, if I had a system with, say, for instance, a conical stylus, something that was a little better at masking the surface noise, that wouldn't be as much of a problem. So you might think of that. Do you have a really advanced stylus profile that gets really deep into the groove and really hears everything the vinyl has to offer? It's almost a hindrance with this record. But this record is exactly how it should sound, in my opinion. This has the dynamic scale, that sense of grandiose. It's just the top end, Nick Mason's drums, they have a nice sizzle to them. The top end is just so natural sounding. It doesn't sound brassy or brittle. It's fantastic, but it suffers from lower quality vinyl. I would also say, my opinion is maybe this was made from a safety. And the reason I say that is this is probably my number 3 choice, right? But when I get to my number 2 choice, this is the UK copy. This has a very, very similar sound to that, but just ever so slightly better. Kind of like this was made from the master tape. Everything is just a little bit more clearer, and I'm talking very small degrees, a little bit more clearer, a little bit more defined. But with the UK copy, I feel the vinyl was just better. Although it is very difficult to find this album clean, regardless of the pressing, because it's, again, a record that's susceptible to noisy vinyl, I've had a much easier time finding quieter copies out of the UK. And again, everything is just a little bit cleaner, a little bit quieter, just a little bit, just like it was made just from a little bit better, fresher, crisper tape. That's just the vibe that this gets from me. Now, I will say, in the US, it's going to be hard to find clean, quiet UK copies. In my experience, British dealers take a lot of subgrade records and put them on eBay. For whatever reason, every time I have seeked out records, British pressings, I've had significantly better luck at going overseas and purchasing them at record fairs. That seems to be where you get the creme de la creme. You're getting the best copies. Finding clean and quiet copies online is very difficult. And if I was to be buying this online, I would actually be the guy asking people to be, hey, can you listen to this and tell me how noisy it is? Tell me about the pops and clicks. Now, I get those emails as a store and they drive me nuts. But I would kind of probably want to be that guy when it comes to this record because, you know, UK copies online, in my experience, you're going to get a lot of turds. There's going to be a lot of bad stuff out there. A lot of dealers just offloading stuff. That's just the case. But again, overall, that would be kind of my number 2 choice. And I think for about 99.99% of you, that's going to be your best choice. Because my next record, which is going to win this shootout, it's going to be the best sounding. When I first started doing this shootout, I thought to myself, you know what? I was listening to it and it was kind of lower on my list. But as I went back and forth and compared slight detail to slight detail, it kept getting better and better and better. Then it finally just, you know what? I hate recommending to you guys the best sounding version of a record that you're most likely never going to get to hear because they only made 1,500 of these and it's thousands of dollars. That is the UK Nimbus Supercut. This thing is rare as hen's teeth, extremely difficult to find, very expensive. You might search eBay, online Discogs, and you might only see 1 or 2 of these things pop up a year. And when they do, they're like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grand I've seen them sell for. Astronomical money. But what this has is the best of every world. The best of everything. It's got all of the fresh, clean, tight, like first generation master sound, first generation master tape sound of the original UK, but it's got the whisper quiet vinyl of the Japanese master sound. It has the best presentation of scale, the synths, you know, the dynamic range is fantastic. It might be cut just a smidge lower than the UK pressings. Turn it up a couple of pips on your, you know, your preamp, and you can volume match it. But this is just the best sounding version. This is the best of everything that is available. If you were to say to yourself, okay, I want the best sounding Wish You Were Here. I got all of these pressings. I've got all of them. How do I make the best sounding version of it? Well, you go sitting, you're like, all right, well, I want the vinyl of this. I want the bass of that. I want the top end of, you know what I mean? You start putting all those together, and then somebody, you know, looks at you and says, oh, okay, yeah, here you go. This is what you asked for. And that's what you have. The UK Nimbus Supercut for thousands of dollars. It's unfortunate, but that's what it is. Sometimes I do these shootout videos, and the winner is $20, $30 record. Or a $20, $30 record is very high up there. Unfortunately, this is one of those shootout videos where the best is the most, and the second and third choice, you're gonna have to spend an immense amount of time listening to multiple copies and working for a clean, quiet one. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. If you just want easy peasy and you don't really care too much, just go right on the website, theingroove.com. Just buy that current Bernie Grundman mastered copy. It's pretty damn good. And it's easy, no fuss, no muss. But that's it, guys. Check us out online at theingroove.com. Until next time.